Good evening, Ajahn Jayasaru and members of the Mahasangha. My name is Brother Ui. Brothers and sisters in the Dhamma, welcome to BGF. And I understand that among the audience are also people from Thailand. So allow me to say Sawadee. I think it's right. Just a brief introduction of Ajahn before we start. Ajahn born in the Isles of Wight, England in 1958, and he was then called Sean Shipperton. He has done a lot of traveling, and one of the places he went to was in India, where then he acquired the interest in the Eastern religion and of course meditation as well. And in 1978 he visited the homestead Vihara, and from there on he became an Anagarika, spending Vasa with Ajahn Sumedo. And later on he proceeded to Thailand and received the Upasampada from the late Ajahn Chah in 1980. And Ajahn was the former abbot of Wat Pa Nanachat until the year 2002. So currently Ajahn is the abbot of the Hermitage in Korat, where the SEA Games is now being held. And this evening, Ajahn shall share with us on the topic of suffering and Kamma, core of Buddhism. And with that, we'd like to invite Ajahn to commence the talk. Thank you.
Throughout the Buddhist world, all the different traditions, I think it's generally acknowledged that the core teaching is that of the Four Noble Truths. And so when we speak about suffering or dukkha, we always have to remember that it is the first of the Four Noble Truths. Of course, and in the West, where the misinterpretations of Buddhism have sometimes outnumbered the interpretations of it, the emphasis on dukkha or suffering as being the distinctive Buddhist teaching led many commentators to portray Buddhism as a very pessimistic teaching, indeed a nihilistic one. And even in the Encyclopedia Britannica and many very well-known, reputable works of reference, Nibbana would be explained as being an absolute extinction. So you can imagine that this didn't endear many people to Theravada Buddhist teachings. The word suffering itself is more or less a compromise translation. Translators, students of Pali have been shaking their heads for years about how to translate this word dukkha into English, and finally decided on suffering as probably the least bad of all the possibilities, or the one that gives least suffering to the translators. I myself prefer to use the Pali word dukkha, and the reason for this is that the word suffering is as often commented upon leads to a rather narrow and distorted understanding of what the Buddha is talking about. So I would like to give my interpretation in a nutshell of what this word means, and my definition is not nibbana. So dukkha means not nibbana. Now, sometimes you read books on Buddhism and they say in Buddhism it teaches everything is dukkha. Well, if you think about that statement just for a moment, you'll see that it's a meaningless statement. It doesn't mean anything. If you say everything is dukkha, well, it's like saying everything is up, or everything is. It's not saying anything at all. That statement would only have meaning when there's something which is not dukkha. And what is not dukkha is nibbana. And it's because the statement everything is dukkha is not, strictly speaking, correct, that we're all here together tonight, and that because there is a path out of dukkha. So my second suggestion for this term dukkha is a lack of true happiness. So if we put those two together, we can say that nibbana is true happiness. And there is a teaching of the Buddha where he puts it in those very words. He says, Nibbanang paramang sukhang, which means nibbana is the supreme happiness. Now, I think when we look at it this way, at least for me, it makes certain teachings a lot clearer. Sometimes we'll hear Buddhists saying, or he or she thinks they're happy, but they're not really happy, or even happiness is suffering. That's often said, isn't it? Yeah, they say they're happy, but really they're suffering. They're not really happy. And so, of course, the person who's experiencing that emotions says, well, what's the difference between being mistaken about being happy and being really happy? Isn't it good enough? And as Buddhists, do we have an answer to that kind of question? So if we take dukkha to be meaning an absence or a lack of true happiness, next question is, well, is there such a thing as true happiness? And this is the third noble truth, and Naroda, yes, there is. And is it possible? Is it realizable for ordinary human beings like all of us to realize that true happiness of nibbana? And the Buddha says yes. So how is it possible? And it's because that lack, that absence of true happiness, of nibbana, is conditioned. It's not a curse. It's not something we've inherited through the mistaken actions of human beings thousands of years ago. It's not in the stars. It's due to our lack of understanding of the way things are. So I am, of course, talking around the Four Noble Truths here. So reformulating the Four Noble Truths, our experience of life is one characterized by a lack of a true enduring happiness. And that lack of true enduring happiness is due to a lack or an absence of understanding, which manifests as craving. That situation is not inevitable, it's not fixed, it's not something we have to try to come to terms with and to accept, but it is something that we can transcend, we can realize this true happiness through the Eightfold Path. Now, we can see that the Buddha started off with the human condition. He started off with the way things are. He started off with those aspects of the way things are which are immediately recognizable. He didn't start off with a very advanced and complex metaphysical system and then asked his followers to try to fit their experience into it. He didn't tell you how you should be, because the Buddha realized if you have a teaching consisting of instructions about what kind of person you should be, that the end result is that most people end up feeling guilty, that they're not how they should be. So the Buddha starting off with how you are right now, and why is it like this? Does it have to be like this? If it doesn't, what are you going to do about it? So it's a very practical teaching. So it's as if the Buddha recognizes an expanse of water, and he points to this shore, and he says there's a shore over there, and to get from this shore to that shore, you build a bridge. So he recognized the water to be crossed, and then he built a bridge, rather than building a bridge and then finding some water to put under it. It's a topical example, perhaps. And the faith that we need as Buddhists is somewhat different from the faith that is expected of followers of theistic religions. And I think it's important that we are able to distinguish Buddhism from other teachings without saying we're right, they're wrong, we're better, they're worse, but in order to be very clear about why it is exactly that we're happy to be Buddhists, and we consider this the path which is most fruitful and beneficial for us. And I've often divided the religions of the world into two main families: the family that grew up in the Middle East, and the religions that belong to that family we can characterize as belief systems. Belief, faith, is the central virtue in those systems, and indeed their religions are often referred to as faiths these days. This faith and that faith. So the word faith and the word religion, at least in the English language, have almost become interchangeable. And this is why Buddhism is often misunderstood and is often seen to be somewhat confusing, because it is not a belief system. The first, I think, really central point that we need to acknowledge is that Buddhism is a different kind of religion. It's a different family. It's a different species of religion. And it's not religion as belief system, but it's religion as education system. So some people say, is Buddhism a religion, or is it a way of life, or is it a philosophy, or is it this, or is it that, or is it a philosophically religious way of life, or is it a religious philosophy, and people spend hours and days and months going on. So we can talk about, yes, it's a religion, but it's a different kind of religion. It's an education system. And in this education system, faith has a certain role to play. But it is always mediated by wisdom. So wherever you come across the word sattha in the Buddhist teachings, you'll notice it's always part of a group of dhammas or virtues. And if faith or sattha is the first one, then wisdom will always be the last one. And we're constantly reminded to balance the two. So faith in Buddhism has to be overlooked, mediated, tempered by the critical faculty. And the Pali word that we chant, ehipassiko, come and see, means that we're open to challenge. You know, if you don't believe in this, it's fine. You can put these teachings to the test, and you should do that. So, faith has the role to play of clarifying our objectives and our path, and leading to effort or virya. And faith in the Buddha's enlightenment is in essence faith in the enlightenment of a very special human being 2,500 years ago. But the implication of that faith, and that's faith in something that we have no means of proving, is the faith in the capacity of a human being to realize enlightenment, or to transcend dukkha, and to realize the true happiness of nibbana. So we're looking into the meaning, the implications of the fundamental movement of faith in Buddhism. Faith in Buddhist enlightenment means faith in the human capacity for enlightenment. And the next step, and the crucial step following from that, is we have strong faith and confidence in our own capacity for enlightenment, every single one of us. So if someone says, what do Buddhists believe in? You know, has anyone ever asked you that? What do Buddhists believe in? You say, well, we believe in our capacity to abandon the unwholesome. We believe in our capacity to develop the wholesome. We believe in our capacity to purify our minds. We, in other words, have a strong faith in our capacity to transcend dukkha and to realize nibbana. Now, even if in this lifetime we don't realize that aim, we take it as the duty, the responsibility, the motivation, the orientation of life which gives meaning to every day, every hour, every minute, every breath that we have. Is that movement towards nibbana. Now, once we have the ultimate goal clearly in our sights, that is transcendence of dukkha, realization of nibbana, which means ultimate true happiness, which in turn means the complete absence of greed, hatred and delusion, then we can now start talking about the middle way. So what's the middle way? The middle way is the optimum practice in any given situation, whether we're in a monastery, in a Dhamma center, when we're at home, in the office, sitting in the car. That way of conducting ourselves through body, speech and mind, which is most effective in reducing the defilements of greed, hatred and delusion, and promoting the positive qualities of generosity and compassion and wisdom. That is the middle way for us at that moment, at that time. So, dukkha, in the Four Noble Truths, dukkha as an Arya Satya, as a noble truth, can be transcended, should be transcended by me, must be transcended by me. This is the kind of progression that one follows in one's contemplation. So this is not a philosophy. We're not just accumulating sophisticated and inspiring ideas, but it's about our lives right now. And we can see very clearly, I think, in the present day, that high ideals and belief in noble things is not enough. Every single day, people are doing terrible things to other human beings in the name of very high ideals. So it's not what you believe, it's what you do. It's what you do with your mind, it's what you do with your body, it's what you do with your speech. In other words, it's your Kamma. So Kamma is action. Action of body, speech and mind. And it's the action which is characterized by intention. Intentional action is the heart of Kamma. So action of body, speech and mind inspired by defilements of greed, hatred and delusion we call very simply bad Kamma. And actions of body, speech and mind characterized by intentions of generosity, kindness and compassion, wisdom are good Kamma. And so in our lives, the challenge moment by moment is how can we create as little bad Kamma as possible and create as much good Kamma as possible. So we can resolve all these incredibly complex teachings into some very, very, very simple challenges in our life. And I would ask you, don't be afraid of simplicity. Don't feel that the more complex an argument is, the better it is for you, or the more beneficial it necessarily is. Sometimes we can pick up Dhamma books and we think, wow, this is really profound. And say, why is it profound? Because I can't understand a word of it. And then we see something like, don't create bad Kamma, do good Kamma. Oh, that's just for kids. You know, I've been studying Buddhism for too long. I mean, I don't need to know that kind of stuff. But it's what you really need is the humility of being the new student every day, never being an expert. And my students who've come with me from Thailand will often hear me relating an anecdote about Albert Einstein. And towards the end of his life, greatest scientist on the planet, most famous scientist on the planet, most immediately recognizable scientist on the planet with the long hair and the moustache and everything, you know. And he went to some seminar, and behind stage somebody asked him, "Who are you?" And he said very simply, "I'm a student of physics." And that's just such a wonderful response to me, that instead of saying, "Don't you know who I am?" or at least wanting to say that, you know, I've got two Nobel Prizes, or however, I'm the most famous scientist in the world, you know, I've forgotten more about physics yesterday than you'll ever learn in your whole life. And he said, I'm a student of physics. And this is the attitude that I would suggest would stand you well in Dhamma practice. Never be a Dhamma expert. Don't go to the other extent and say, "Oh, I'm so stupid, I don't understand anything," because that's a form of pride as well. So there are different kinds of pride and conceit. You know, some people are proud in being special and being very good at everything. Other people are proud at being hopeless, and it's a very perverse kind of pride. I mean, I don't know in Malaysia, when I was at school, if you're a boy, you have to be top or you have to be bottom. You know, the worst thing you can be as a boy is in the middle of the class. It's kind of, you know, you've either got to be outrageously good or really terrible and notorious. You know, there's no middle ground. So these are kinds of conceit that can arise. So we're interested in this very basic challenge of abandoning the unwholesome and developing the wholesome. And in one of his teachings to the Sangha, the Lord Buddha said that a monk in the noble lineage of the Sangha is a monk who derives great joy from abandoning the unwholesome and developing the wholesome. And this is a teaching which gives us a very good reminder that there is, I would call it a hierarchy of happiness, and that there are different levels of happiness, and some are compatible and some are not. And for the beginner and someone who's just starting out on spiritual life, it seems, you've got to give this up and you've got to give that up, and all these things give me so much pleasure, I can't do these anymore. And you can feel this kind of shrinking and this kind of fear, and it all seems so kind of black and uninviting. But the actual experience, if you take the plunge through that informed faith that I mentioned just now, that you can do it and you should do it and you must do it, that nothing else is worth doing, then you find that just as certain kinds of pleasure and happiness that you once cherished slip away, other forms of happiness take their place. Because as human beings, we can't live without happiness. And the secret of a long monastic life, I would say, if there's any one secret, well, there are probably, a few key points. But one is, you have to enjoy it. You have to really be happy as a monk. And the monks who stay a long time, the monks are really happy to be monks. If they're just sort of gritting their teeth and fighting defilements and just saying, it's all suffering, you can't do that for very long, really. But the kinds of happiness become more refined. And as I say, you can start to develop a real sense of joy when you see defilements and things falling away. And you can experience real joy when you start to see beautiful qualities, spiritual qualities that weren't there before, suddenly appearing. And here there's another trap that you can fall into. You can start to feel, I shouldn't take any joy in the good qualities I have. I'll get really stuck up and proud and conceited. But that doesn't follow. And in fact, the Buddha was constantly teaching us to be intelligent and clever in ways of bringing up positive emotion in the heart as a fuel to enable a practice which is consistent, not just for a few days on a meditation retreat, but throughout months and years. And the ability to recognize the goodness and the noble qualities that are starting to flourish in your heart, not as your possession, but just as beautiful parts of nature that are starting to appear within your body and mind, then this is something that gives the mind a great buoyancy. Now, I use that word buoyancy deliberately, and I feel it's a good translation of a very key Pali term, which is pamoja.